a Transylvanian. Oh, and a Romanian. And from 2007, a European too. Why challenge the stereotypical view of a Transylvanian? Is Borat challenging your idea of how you view an Eastern European? Or could it be that the reason we find him so funny is that we recognize the British humour? A BBC report on the expansion of the EU concluded that Romania is light years behind Europe. In certain aspects, that could be perfectly true, thinking of its 19th century infrastructure. But surely, Romania is an established and prolific cultural womb in Europe. We should hold hands like lovers do. But what is preventing us from doing so? Is it money or economic power? And if so, how did we get here? Britain literally saved my life when I was offered haven here in 1979. I was welcomed and celebrated hero style for my courageous escape from Ceausescu's Romania. One headline read, "Transylvanian escape. Mariana says fantastic." As my life story began to attract press interest, questions started to roll. The most frequent being, were we brainwashed by the communists? It caused me distress to realize that people here had no idea that Romanians were prisoners in their own country and very much aware of the dangers of communism. That very awareness places us in the opposite position to brainwashed. And by brainwashed, I'm sure they meant indoctrination, deliberately using the science fiction expression to emphasize how powerless we were under the big boot of dictatorship. If anything, these poor victims of ideological experiment gone wrong have been completely besotted by Western values and the idea of freedom put upon them by the Western world, with good intentions, no doubt. Western propaganda was clearly heard in the underground all the way to the glorious moment of regime change. However, those Romanians who fought for freedom were not to know that in the meantime the West had changed its mind. In other words, we may have found new freedom, but we should refrain from traveling abroad, as by now we are labeled as undesirable, poor, uneducated, beggars, and hardcore criminals. I'd like to think that I'm different, but I find myself reacting like most people do. A leafleter in London told me that he was a writer, and I remember I couldn't possibly take him seriously because he was poor. He might be the next George Orwell, but I looked at him for what he is now, and not for what he says he is or his potential. Have I become cynical without realizing it? The vacuum of clear ideology coupled with the economic gap in a world of polysemantics has opened the floodgates of confusion for all of us. The visionary artist Mircea Roman called it Dezorient Express. A closer look at Roman's sculpture installation will reveal, perhaps surprisingly, that some degree of cross-wiring has occurred on both sides of the camp, east and west. The polysemantic exploits in the arts have been borrowed by politicians in order to apply the age-old divide and rule technique, while giving us the impression that we have a say in everything they do on our behalf. Is the Cold War over? Or is the knocking off of spies in London just a reminder that it is not? What if we're only in a half-time break? If so, what is the score? One goal for the West was that the Eastern Europeans would embrace Western values and thus gaining millions of followers, mimicking the West in a blindfolded trust in order to keep up with the Joneses. Sadly, most of it misunderstood. The West received a goal too, own goal, by borrowing the worst possible communist ideas and put them into practice, some in stealth, some under a different name, and some as new, like centralized power in the EU, subsidized state economy, and public-private partnership. So, 1-1 at half-time. But if I were to use the arts as my crystal ball, I could tell you the flavor of things to come, or even who is going to score next. Understanding begins but does not end with the act of perception. The wall to which Romance people are pinned against is our inner wall. And on this wall, politicians and artists feel free to stick their bill posters. If you're not careful, it could happen to you too. I had an extraordinary, if turbulent, journey from the east all the way here in the west, and very lucky indeed to survive my narrow escape and be here to tell the story. Will you email me, please, and tell me if you think the future is going to be fantastic?
I am Ioana Iliescu and I am going to be an artist.
I am Delia Popa and I am a visual artist working in different media.
Hello, my name is Monica Madas. I am a puppeteer and a jazz singer.
Lasă satul în cel jălea și oftatul să-l mănânce și nu tare, ca așa lasă fiecare. Hai, Dali, dorule,